Welcome to the summary of the Thinking Before You Decide Critical Thinking Skills for Tribal Leaders. My name is Charles Dayton. I'm the CEO and founder of Tribal Strategy. One of the leadership challenges we have, whether it's a department head or manager or tribal council member, is that often there are decisions that have to be made fairly quickly. There's a lot of pressure to act, but without full information, or there's a political dynamics that group loyalty can override sound reasoning, and that many of these decisions can be high stakes. And the consequences of these decisions can have unintended consequences within the community. Reactively thinking is the lowest level. It's gut response. It's instinctual. It's fast, but it's error prone because we've not thoroughly vetted the various ideas and we've had limited information to guide our decisions. There's analytical thinking, structured reasoning, or weighing evidence and options. Strategy is about looking at alternatives, and often uh, all those alternatives aren't fully fleshed out when you make those decisions. And so critical thinking is about trying to get to the strategic level, which is systems level, thinking long term, making sure the decisions today enable us to accomplish what we need to in the future. So the four question framework, think about how this might be applied to any decisions that you have. If you consider a major decision that's coming up, whether it's approval, or whether it's a policy or norms, in terms of how you're going to apply that. So the first question is, what are we actually deciding? We clarify the real question before anything else. And what do we know about the situation versus what do we assume about the situation? We want to separate facts from opinion. And so we're asking questions like, what's the evidence that this is really an issue? If we're trying to solve a problem, do we shoot from the hip, or do we say, what is actually the issue here? And do we know that's an issue? We also want to say who's affected and how. We look at the stakeholders impacted by the decision, and we do some kind of analysis about what does the stakeholder need, what is the gap between what they're currently experiencing and what we could change, what results we could utilize, and what would the overall impact be. And then the fourth question is a question of risk analysis. We essentially are saying, what could go wrong if this goes down in flames? What would be some of the reasons? And so we look at the potential risks, and we evaluate the potential likelihood these risks will be, and also look at what are the mitigation steps that we can take to address those risks. So again, this is the framework that can be easily applied and ideally become internalized by leaders so that they're asking these questions on a consistent basis. We said that one of the challenges with critical thinking is that we bring our assumptions rather than data to the discussion. And so imagine, a tribal department requests a new program that's not yet been funded. And so you look at some of the questions you could ask, again, as you're checking on the assumptions. So you list, it says 3 to 5 assumptions embedded in this request. One assumption might be the community actually wants this to happen or cares for this to happen. Or an assumption might be we have the capacity actually to make a difference. Or an assumption might be we have the resources to do this and so forth. So it's good to go through a process of evaluating those assumptions. Also identify which have evidence and which are just guesses. What data supports our opinions, our viewpoints, or the assumptions, and which are sometimes more anecdotal. And sometimes we look more at the anecdote rather than the broader picture to drive these decisions. So one or two people can completely impact a major decision because they're emotional about it. They are the loudest sometimes, and yet it doesn't lead to always to the best decisions. And then ask the question, what changes if the top assumptions are wrong? If there's not a demand, or if there are real issues with our capacity to implement, what's going to change? So this is an assumption audit. Again, invaluable if within a group dynamic, someone either formally or informally takes the role for asking good questions. Some of the biases that derail not just councils, but any leaders that are making decisions. Um, first bias is just general groupthink. This idea that we all have to be supportive of a particular direction and a particular idea, supports group loyalty and so forth. but it gives the appearance that the best decision has been made. We're all behind it, and is often undermining more of a critical process of challenging ideas. Confirmation bias is one of the most significant of the thinking errors that impact decision makings. This is where we're seeking data that confirms what we already believe. We believe something from the beginning without being willing to challenge it or question it, and we only gather information that supports that belief. Authority bias. This is deferring to the loudest and most senior voice. Sometimes people will refer to their experience over time and so forth, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's the best experience or that that's the only way to do things. Or sometimes people just be the loudest, be kind of trying to overwhelm people with their support for something, and again, it undermines our ability to think clearly. Sunk cost fallacy says we've already invested too much to stop now. We've put time and energy and resources into a particular outcome that's not working, or our process is not working, and rather than killing it and saying let's say what resources are still available, we continue on because of sunk cost fallacy. Availability bias. This is overweighing the most recent or memorable examples. This is when we're really close to a situation and we can bring up, confirmation bias type issues, and then overweight those those pieces of information rather than gathering a broader view of options and alternatives. And then status quo bias. And this really relates to if we're trying to make change. This is choosing inaction because change feels risky. It's the safe bet just to do things the way we've always done them. And most organizations I'm dealing with really want to see improvements. They want to see better services. They want to see better leadership. They want to see better structures and systems, things like that. And often people will resist those efforts to change because it's just easier to keep things the way they are. So it says you can interrupt these patterns without creating conflict. The key is knowing the language and also creating an environment where people can have hard conversations and challenge each other in a way that doesn't negatively impact those relationships. So again, some of the ways we can do this as leaders, ask better questions. And I think this first part is really important. It says lead with curiosity, not opposition, and not just blaming. Often something happens and we're looking at who is the individual we can blame for this, rather than saying, well, why did this happen? What were some of the factors that led to this? And it could have been individual behavior, but also there are systems and structures and poor policies that will impact the way things happen. It says structure dissent rather than the devil's advocate. So we encourage deliberate alternative perspectives, not just pushback for its own sake. Someone said, there's a vast difference between critical thinking and just being critical. So sometimes people just like to pick things apart, rather than really saying, let's look at this from multiple perspectives. And we want it to be safe to have those kind of conversations. So building a culture of questioning where we value really good thinking about issues. So make asking why and what if a norm, not an exception, and that safe dissent, again, the challenge of the status quo, is viewed as a real strength for the organization rather than a liability, and especially one that creates conflict within groups. Connect your strategic plan. Again, the starting point for this is to have that framework to say, does this decision align with where we said we want to go, or is it just being reactive? Many of the organizations that are really strategic get really good at saying no, because they have this greater yes. This their yes is where they're going as an organization. It's their vision. It's their mission. It's the goals they've established. And so, if something comes up, it might be a grant. If it doesn't meet the criteria of directly aligned with their strategic plan, then they say no, and they need to be skilled in doing that to lead to those better outcomes. So it says, think of a real decision your organization faces right now. Apply the 4-question framework silently for 3 minutes. So this is something you can do with your team. And And then, based upon this, they could share, what's an assumption we haven't examined, what's a risk we haven't named, or a stakeholder that hasn't been considered. There's so much overlap between program improvement and project management and all these other skills related to strategy execution that relate to just these fundamental questions that are tied to the decision making process. So one of the things we shared with you in the handouts was a self-assessment about not just how your council thinks, but many of these questions are going to apply to leaders in other positions. So you look at some of these questions, does our council clearly define what we are deciding before we vote? Has that been established clearly? Or is it vague and consequently creates confusion? We regularly distinguish between facts, assumptions, and opinions. Are we data driven? Are we evidence based in how we approach things? The dissenting viewpoints are welcomed and considered seriously rather than the judgment that safety that exists within the group dynamic is challenged and really undermined because of that. We evaluate how decisions align with our strategic plan. Do we assess community impact before approving major initiatives and so forth? So you can see if your scores are in the 40 to 50 range, each of these is 1 to 5, then you have a strong critical thinking culture. If it's 25, 30, you're developing, but there are gaps to address. And then if it's quite a bit lower than that, there's significant opportunities for growth. It means you have a culture that's probably more reactive and less critical and less strategic in how it approaches things. So one of the things that we've developed is an online strategy management system we call Action Strategy. And so once we use this both for developing the plan and really providing clarity, but also establishing priorities among the alternatives, so that it's an on-site or online tool that helps us document the plans. But also when we get into management, boy, that still requires a high degree of critical thinking. We run into barriers and issues along the way that cause us to work through those issues and make decisions all along the way that enable us to both develop good plans but also execute those plans. So some of the key takeaways from the presentation, think about the 4 questions. Are there the ways of embedding those into your decision-making process? Understanding how biases impact how we see things, and without blame, recognizing them first in ourselves, but creating a safe environment for challenging the group about their biases. Build a culture where questioning is expected, it's valued, and it's not analyzing things forever, because we have to have also you balance that with a bias for action. But you want to have a culture where it's safe to ask critical questions related to decisions. And then connect every decision back to your strategic plan. Again, you understand that the framework that exists around effective planning, it's critical that these decisions are screened through that plan, and whether they support it, then that's great. If they don't support it, then that is something you say no to. So one of the things we wanted to offer is a free strategic plan checklist, either with your council or if you have a department. We can help with that assessment and give you a snapshot of the decision thinking. One of the things I think this helps is it brings to people's attention, say other council members, these patterns that it may exist where people are not thinking critically or not thinking strategically. And it's a healthy development activity to say, moving forward, we support each other in having uncomfortable conversations, because our ultimate goal is the benefit and welfare of our communities. And we, in our leadership roles, are tasked with thinking with wisdom and thinking critically so that our decisions are ultimately sound. If you have any questions about any of this, please feel free to give me a contact me. Again, this is such an important skill set for leaders, and we're happy to help you in developing these within your important boards and councils and leadership generally. So thank you.